In the scorching Sonoran Desert of Arizona, summer of 2005, a tragedy unfolded that would have normally been recorded as just another heartbreaking statistic in the harsh realities of border crossings. The desperate journey of the Hernandez family ended in devastation when their water ran out 3 days into their trek, leaving 4 children alone in the merciless desert heat. At least that's what Border Patrol agents reported after finding scattered belongings and 2 adult bodies. But what they failed to discover were the 4 Hernandez children, Maria, 11, Diego, 9, twins Sofia and Elena, 6, who had wandered away from the scene following their mother's final instruction to find shade and wait for help. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Their remarkable story of survival against impossible odds remained buried for months, preserved only in their memories, scattered reports from local tribes, and eventually through documentation at the Arizona Department of Child Safety. This is the forgotten saga of how 4 young children endured the desert's extreme conditions and how the intervention of a grieving widower named Ethan Blackwood gave them a second chance when the world had already written their obituaries. Ethan Blackwood had every reason to feel hopeless as his dusty pickup truck bumped along the remote desert access road that sweltering July morning in 2005. The barren Arizona landscape stretched endlessly around him, dotted with saguaro cacti and mesquite trees that provided little relief from the relentless sun. Nothing about the desolate scenery matched his internal landscape, equally barren, equally harsh, after losing his wife Rebecca to cancer just 8 months prior. A former search and rescue specialist turned wildlife photographer, Ethan had retreated to this remote corner of the Sonoran Desert to escape his grief. His cabin, located on the edge of the Tohono O'odham Nation lands, offered the isolation he craved. Out here, 30 miles from the nearest town of Ajo, he could avoid the well-meaning but painful condolences, the constant reminders of Rebecca's absence, and the expectations to move on that seemed to follow him everywhere else. "Just you and me out here, Beck," he whispered to the empty passenger seat, a habit he hadn't broken, despite knowing it only deepened his pain. The small urn containing some of his wife's ashes sat secured in the glove compartment, his constant companion. On these photography expeditions, Rebecca had loved the desert as much as he did. Their shared passion for documenting its secret beauty had brought them together 15 years earlier at a conservation conference. Today's mission was simple: capture the desert ironwood trees. In bloom before the brief flowering season ended, these ancient, slow-growing trees produce spectacular purple blossoms for just a short window each year. Rebecca had always planned their annual pilgrimage to photograph them, marking the dates on their calendar months in advance. This year, Ethan almost skipped it entirely. The thought of continuing their tradition alone felt like reopening a wound that had barely begun to heal. But something, perhaps the memory of Rebecca's enthusiasm or simple muscle memory from years of routine, had pulled him from his bed before dawn, camera equipment packed almost on autopilot. "Final Ironwood expedition," he'd scribbled in his journal. Maybe after this, he could finally stop pretending that maintaining their shared rituals somehow kept her present. Ethan parked his truck at the end of the dirt road and gathered his photography gear. The temperature already approached 100 degrees, despite the early hour. He checked his water supply, 3 gallons plus a hydration pack, adequate for a day's hike if he was careful. The desert killed the unprepared, a reality he'd witnessed firsthand during his search and rescue days with the Pima County Sheriff's Department. His planned route would take him along a dried creek bed that local Tohono O'odham called the Sleeping Snake for its winding path through the landscape. The Ironwood Grove he sought lay about 4 miles in, nestled in a small depression that gathered what little moisture existed in this arid environment. Few outsiders knew of its location. It had been a special gift from Manuel Flores, an elder of the nation who had befriended Ethan and Rebecca years ago. The weight of his pack settled comfortably against his back as he locked the truck and surveyed the terrain. The desert held no fear for Ethan. Its dangers were predictable, its challenges straightforward compared to the complexity of human emotions. He'd been battling. Out here, survival had clear rules: find water, avoid heat exhaustion, navigate accurately. If only grief followed such logical principles. Ethan had covered nearly 2 miles, photographing interesting formations and light patterns along the way, when he noticed something unusual. A small piece of bright fabric fluttered from a creosote bush, completely out of place in the natural environment. His search and rescue instincts immediately kicked in as he approached to investigate. It was a child's sock, pink with small unicorns printed on it. "What the hell?" he muttered, retrieving the item and scanning the surrounding area. Border crossers occasionally came through this region, but usually followed routes further south. Finding evidence of a child here, so far from established paths, raised immediate concerns. Ethan's training took over. He examined the ground carefully, looking for tracks or disturbances in the desert soil. The recent light rainfall 3 days ago had left the ground receptive to impressions, and it didn't take long to spot them. Small footprints, definitely children's, heading toward a cluster of large boulders about a quarter-mile ahead. All thoughts of Ironwood photography vanished as Ethan followed the tracks. His pace quickened, eyes constantly scanning for additional signs. More evidence appeared: a small water bottle, empty and crushed, a tattered hair ribbon, disturbed pebbles that indicated stumbling, exhausted steps. The footprints led directly to a formation locals called Shadow Rock. A massive boulder balanced atop several smaller ones, creating a natural shelter underneath. As Ethan approached, he slowed his movements and listened intently. Years of search and rescue work had taught him that lost people, especially children, often hid from rescuers out of fear or confusion. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Hello?" he called softly. "Is anyone there? I'm here to help." Silence answered him, but Ethan's instincts told him he wasn't alone. He crouched down to peer into the shadowy space beneath the boulder. What he saw stopped his breath. 4 children huddled together in the deepest part of the shade. Their clothes were tattered, faces dirt-streaked and sunburned. The oldest, a girl, held a sharp rock in her hand, her body positioned protectively in front of the 3 younger children. Their eyes, wide with fear and exhaustion, reflected a wariness that no child should possess. "It's okay," Ethan said softly, remaining where he was to avoid frightening them further. "I'm not going to hurt you. Are you lost?" The oldest girl spoke in rapid Spanish, her voice hoarse from dehydration. Ethan's Spanish was rudimentary at best, learned during his search and rescue days, but he caught enough to understand they were terrified and had been hiding for at least 3 days. "Agua," he said, slowly removing his water bottle from his pack. He placed it on the ground and pushed it toward them, then backed away several steps. The girl hesitated, suspicion warring with desperate thirst. Finally, she darted forward, snatched the bottle, and retreated to share the water among the 4 of them, carefully rationing small sips to each child. Ethan's mind raced through possibilities. Border crossers, almost certainly. The parents must be... He pushed the thought away, focusing on the immediate situation. 4 severely dehydrated children, at least 3 miles from his vehicle, in dangerous heat that would only intensify as the day progressed. He needed to establish trust, and quickly. From his pack, He pulled out the emergency protein bars he always carried. Again, he placed them on the ground and backed away. This time, the oldest girl spoke to the others before approaching the food. The youngest children began to cry softly at the sight of it. "My name is Ethan," he said, pointing to himself. "Ethan, ¿cómo te llamas?" "Maria," the oldest girl finally answered, her voice barely audible. She pointed to the others. "Diego, Sofia, Elena." The twins clung to each other, their identical faces marked by fear and exhaustion. Through broken Spanish and gestures, Ethan pieced together their immediate story. They had been walking with their parents for days. The water ran out. Their parents had collapsed. They had wandered, following their mother's final instruction to find shade and wait for help. The realization hit Ethan hard. These children had likely witnessed their parents' deaths from dehydration or heat exposure, then somehow managed to follow survival instincts to find this shaded shelter. The miracle wasn't just that they were alive, it was that they had maintained the presence of mind to stay together and seek protection from the elements. "I need to get you to my truck," Ethan explained, using gestures to supplement his limited Spanish. "Camion, water, food, help." Maria translated for the others, then nodded cautiously. "Policia?" she asked, fear evident in her voice. Ethan understood immediately. The fear of border patrol and deportation had likely kept them hiding even when search parties might have passed nearby. He thought quickly, weighing moral and legal obligations against the immediate need to save these children's lives. "No policia now," he answered carefully. "First water, food, safe, comprende?" The journey back to his truck became a slow, careful procession. Diego, the 9-year-old boy, could walk with assistance, but the 6-year-old twins were too weak. Ethan carried one on his back and one in his arms, while Maria walked beside him, occasionally stumbling from exhaustion. He stopped frequently to give them small amounts of water, careful not to allow them to drink too much too quickly, which could be dangerous after severe dehydration. As they walked, Ethan's mind raced through scenarios. The right thing, the legal thing, would be to take them directly to authorities, but his years working search and rescue had shown him how the system often failed vulnerable people, especially undocumented immigrants. These children had already endured unimaginable trauma. The thought of them being processed through cold institutional channels, possibly separated and deported, felt unbearable. Yet harboring them would be a federal offense. His photography, career, his home, everything could be lost if he made the wrong choice. Rebecca would know what to do, he thought bitterly. She had always possessed a moral clarity that cut through his more cautious nature. By the time they reached his truck, Ethan had made a temporary decision. He would take them to his cabin, rehydrate them properly, let them rest, and then figure out the next steps. At minimum, they needed medical attention and proper care before any system processed them. The drive back to his cabin took 40 minutes, during which all 4 children fell into exhausted sleep. Ethan watched them in the rearview mirror, their small bodies somehow finding space to curl together on the back seat of his extended cab pickup. Maria's arm remained protectively draped over the youngest, even in sleep. His cabin appeared on the horizon, a simple structure of weathered wood and stone that he and Rebecca had purchased 8 years ago as a weekend retreat, never imagining it would become his permanent, solitary home after her death. For the first time in months, he felt something break through his grief, a sense of urgent purpose that demanded his full attention. Inside, Ethan worked methodically to address the children's most immediate needs. He prepared a rehydration solution using water, salt, and sugar, a trick he'd learned during rescue training. He cleaned their sunburned skin with cool cloths, treated their blistered feet, and found clean t-shirts for them to wear while he washed their filthy clothes. As evening approached, the children began to reveal more of themselves. Diego, once He felt safer, became almost talkative, his Spanish flowing too quickly for Ethan to follow completely. The twins remained silent but watchful, their identical brown eyes following Ethan's every movement. Maria maintained her protective stance, even as exhaustion threatened to overcome her. Using a translation app on his phone, thankfully he had satellite internet even in this remote location, Ethan began to understand more of their story. They had traveled from Guatemala, a journey of many weeks. Their parents had saved for years to pay guides who abandoned them near the border. They had walked for 3 days in the desert before their water ran out. Their father had collapsed first, then their mother, who had used her final strength to direct the children toward possible shade. "We waited for them to wake up," Maria explained through the translation app, her young face showing a premature understanding of death that broke Ethan's heart. "But they didn't, so we did what Mama said. Find shade, stay together, wait for help." That night, after settling the children in his bedroom while he took the couch, Ethan sat on his porch and watched the desert stars emerge. The immensity of what had just entered his life felt overwhelming. 4 traumatized, undocumented children, their parents dead somewhere in the desert, his legal obligation to report them warring with his human instinct to protect them from further trauma. "What would you do, Beck?" he whispered to the night sky. The stars offered no answer, but for the first time since her death, Ethan felt something besides grief. These children needed him in a way no one had since Rebecca's diagnosis. Their presence had jolted him from the comfortable numbness he'd cultivated over months of isolation. Morning brought new challenges. The twins developed fevers during the night, likely a combination of exposure, dehydration, and trauma. Diego revealed angry blisters on his feet that needed more than basic first aid. Maria remained vigilant, refusing to sleep more than short stretches, always positioning herself between the door and the younger children. Ethan knew he needed supplies, proper medicine, children's clothing, more food, but leaving them alone seemed impossible, and bringing them into town risked exposure. Finally, he decided to call the one person in the area he trusted implicitly, Manuel Flores, the Tohono O'odham elder who had shown him and Rebecca the secret ironwood grove years ago. Manuel arrived 2 hours later, his ancient pickup truck, rattling up the dirt driveway. At 78, the tribal elder moved more slowly than when Ethan had first met him, but his eyes remained sharp and knowing as he took in the situation without judgment. "The desert gives strange gifts," Manuel said after Ethan explained everything. "Sometimes harsh ones." "I don't know what to do," Ethan admitted. "Legally, I should report them immediately." Manuel nodded thoughtfully. "The law is one path, but these children crossed many borders to reach you. Not just the line between countries. They crossed from security to danger, from family to orphanhood, from hope to despair. And now, perhaps, back toward hope again. The Creator does not place such journeys in our path without purpose." "I can't keep them," Ethan protested. "I'm a single man with no experience with children. I'm still barely functioning after Rebecca." His voice caught on her name. "Perhaps that is exactly why they found you," Manuel replied. "2 broken families meeting at the point of greatest need." He gazed at the children, who watched the stranger warily from the doorway. "My daughter Elena works at the health clinic. She can check them without questions. My wife can gather clothes. For a few days at least, we can help you keep them safe, while you find the right path." "And what is the right path?" Ethan asked, desperation edging his voice. Manuel's weathered hand rested briefly on Ethan's shoulder. "That, my friend, is what you must discover. But remember, these children have already lost everything once. Whatever you decide must not force them to lose everything again." The following days established a strange new rhythm to Ethan's previously solitary existence. Manuel's daughter, examined the children, confirming they were dehydrated and exhausted but had no serious medical conditions beyond Diego's infected blisters, which she treated with antibiotics. Manuel's wife, Josefina, arrived with children's clothing, fresh, in tortillas and a quiet efficiency that somehow organized Ethan's bachelor cabin into a functional home for 5 people. More surprising was how quickly the children began to adapt to their new environment. Diego discovered Ethan's collection of nature guides and spent hours looking at the pictures, asking questions through the translation app about desert animals. The twins, Elena and Sofia, gradually emerged from their fearful silence, following Ethan around the cabin and yard with curious eyes. Maria remained watchful, but allowed herself brief moments of childhood when she thought no one was looking, examining Ethan's camera equipment or leafing through Rebecca's old gardening books that remained on the shelves. A week passed, then another. Ethan knew he was delaying the inevitable decision. Each morning he woke thinking, "Today I'll contact authorities," and each night he went to sleep having found reasons to wait one more day. Manuel visited regularly, teaching the children about desert plants and bringing news from the reservation. His presence provided crucial cultural connection and translation that Ethan couldn't offer. It was Manuel who suggested the first attempt to locate the children's parents' bodies. "The dead must be honored," he explained. "Until this is done, the children cannot fully begin their healing." With Josefina staying with the children, Ethan and Manuel retraced the route to Shadow Rock, then followed the children's descriptions, and Maria's surprisingly accurate sense of direction to locate where they had left their parents. The grim discovery, 2 bodies partially covered by drifting sand and scavenged by desert wildlife, hit Ethan harder than he expected. These people had sacrificed everything for their children's chance at a better life. Manuel performed a traditional blessing while Ethan photographed the scene and collected identification documents from the father's decomposing wallet. Necessary evidence if the children were ever to have legal closure. They marked the GPS coordinates for later recovery by proper authorities whenever Ethan decided to come forward. That night, after Manuel had left and the children were asleep, Ethan sat on his porch with his laptop, researching immigration law, foster care statistics, and options for undocumented orphans. The picture that emerged was grim. At best, the children would enter an overwhelmed system where they might remain together but would likely face deportation to Guatemala, a country the youngest barely remembered. At worst, they would be separated, processed through detention facilities, and eventually returned to distant relatives or orphanages in a country plagued by the very violence their parents had fled. As Ethan closed his laptop, he noticed Maria standing in the doorway, watching him with those 2 old eyes in her young face. "Nos enviarás lejos?" she asked softly. "Will you send us away?" The translation app wasn't needed for Ethan to understand her question. The fear in her voice transcended language barriers. "I don't know," he answered honestly, showing her the respect of truth rather than empty reassurance. "I want what's best for you and your siblings." She approached and sat beside him on the porch step, her small shoulder just barely touching his arm, the first voluntary contact she had initiated. "Our parents wanted us to be safe," she said slowly, choosing words Ethan might understand without the app. "Wanted us to have futuro." She gestured toward the cabin where her siblings slept. "Here is safe." Ethan felt the weight of her trust, so cautiously offered after unimaginable loss. 4 lives hung in the balance of his decision. Children who had already survived more than most adults ever face. The legal and practical obstacles to keeping them seemed insurmountable. Yet something in Maria's quiet dignity reminded him of Rebecca's favorite saying, "The right path is rarely the easy one." That night, Ethan dreamed of Rebecca for the first time since her death, without the usual overwhelming grief. In the dream, she stood in their garden, surrounded by the native plants they had cultivated together, looking exactly as she had before. Cancer hollowed her out. "You found them," she said simply, smiling. "I don't know what to do with them," Ethan replied. Rebecca laughed, the sound so achingly familiar that even in the dream tears sprang to his eyes. "Yes, you do. You're just afraid. I'm not qualified to raise 4 children. I'm still grieving you. I live in the middle of nowhere. I'm a broken man, Beck." She approached him, dream-real, and placed her hand against his cheek. "Broken recognizes. Broken, love. That's why they found you, instead of someone whole. You'll heal each other." Ethan woke with tears on his face, but a strange clarity in his mind. The path forward remained difficult, complex, and legally challenging, but for the first time he could envision a possible future that included these 4 children who had literally emerged from the desert into his life. The following morning, Ethan called the one person whose professional advice he trusted completely, his college roommate, James Whitaker, now an immigration attorney in Tucson. After swearing him to confidentiality, Ethan explained the entire situation. "You've put yourself in serious legal jeopardy," James warned after listening to the full story. "Harboring undocumented minors, not reporting deaths on federal land. There are multiple felonies involved here, Ethan." "I know the legal risks," Ethan replied. "What I need to know is whether there's any path forward that keeps these kids safe, together, and here in the United States, preferably with me." The silence stretched so long that Ethan thought the call had dropped. "Are you serious?" James finally asked. "You, the guy who disappeared into the desert to be alone after Rebecca died, want to become the guardian of 4 traumatized, undocumented Guatemalan children?" Put so bluntly, the idea sounded absurd even to Ethan's ears. Yet something had fundamentally shifted in him over these weeks. The children had awakened parts of himself he thought had died with Rebecca, his capacity for care, for purpose beyond mere survival, for connection to something larger than his grief. "Yes," Ethan said, surprising himself with the firmness of his conviction. "If there's any legal way to make it happen, that's what I want." James sighed heavily. "There might be a path, but it's narrow and complicated. Special immigrant juvenile status could apply, but it requires state court findings that reunification with parents isn't viable, obviously true here, and that return to their home country isn't in their best interest. You'd need to become their legal guardian first, which means coming forward about their existence." "What are the chances of success?" Ethan asked. "Honestly, it depends on which judge you get, which ICE officials handle the case, and whether you can prove you're a suitable guardian. Your search and rescue background helps. Your isolation and lack of experience with children doesn't. The fact that you concealed them initially will be problematic. But it's possible. Technically, yes. Practically, you're looking at years of legal battles, significant expenses, and no guarantee of success. These kids could still end up deported at the end of it all." After ending the call, Ethan walked to the edge of his property and looked out across the desert landscape. The same terrain that had nearly killed these children now served as their temporary sanctuary. The irony wasn't lost on him. Nature itself was neither cruel nor kind. It simply existed according to its own immutable laws. It was human systems, borders, laws, prejudices that transformed natural challenges into insurmountable barriers. When Ethan returned to the cabin, he found Diego attempting to prepare breakfast, standing on a chair to reach the stove. The twins were setting the table with mismatched plates, giggling as they worked together. Maria supervised it all, issuing instructions in Spanish while keeping a watchful eye on the door for Ethan's return. The domestic scene, chaotic, imperfect, but filled with life, struck Ethan with unexpected force. His cabin, for months a mausoleum to his grief, had transformed into something living again. These children, against all odds, had carried hope across the desert like a precious, improbable flame that now flickered in his home. "We made breakfast," Diego announced proudly in careful English, a language he was absorbing with remarkable speed. "I see that," Ethan replied, taking in the disaster zone that was formerly his kitchen. Eggshells littered the counter, spilled, milk pooled near the refrigerator, and something that might have been pancake batter congealed in a bowl. "It looks impressive." Maria watched him nervously, clearly uncertain whether he would be angry about the mess. Instead, Ethan found himself laughing, genuinely laughing, for the first time in longer than he could remember. "Let me help," he said, picking up a dishcloth. Cooking is always better as a team effort. As they worked together to salvage breakfast, Ethan made his decision. The path ahead would be difficult, the obstacles numerous, the outcome uncertain. But one thing had become clear. These 4 children, through some miracle of timing, geography, and sheer survival instinct, had found exactly the person who needed them as desperately as they needed him. That afternoon, he gathered them in the living room. Using the translation app to ensure his meaning was clear, Ethan explained his plan. "I want to try to keep you safe here with me," he said slowly. "It won't be easy. We will have to talk to officials, explain everything that happened. There will be many questions, many forms, many people involved. I cannot promise it will work, but I promise I will fight for you to stay together and to stay here if that's what you want." Maria translated for the younger children, then asked the question that clearly worried her most. "Will they separate us?" "I will do everything in my power to prevent that," Ethan promised. "My friend is a lawyer who helps immigrants. He believes we have a chance if we do everything correctly." The children conferred among themselves, their rapid Spanish beyond Ethan's comprehension. Finally, Maria nodded. "We want to stay with you," she said simply. "You found us when no one else could. Mama said help would come. You were the help she promised." The weight of their trust settled on Ethan's shoulders, not as a burden, but as a sacred responsibility. These children had already survived. Impossible odds. With his help, perhaps they could do more than merely survive. Perhaps they could thrive. Tomorrow would bring the first steps on a challenging journey, contacting authorities, reporting the parents' deaths, beginning the complex legal process that might eventually make them a family in the eyes of the law. The odds were long, the system often unforgiving, but as Ethan looked at the 4 faces watching him with cautious hope, he felt something he had thought lost forever after Rebecca's death. The conviction that some battles, however difficult, were absolutely worth fighting. The desert, which had taken so much from all of them, had somehow also given an unexpected gift, the chance to create a new family from the fragments of broken ones. As the sun set beyond his window, painting the harsh landscape in improbable beauty, Ethan silently thanked whatever fate or divine intervention had led him to abandon his ironwood photography mission, and instead follow the trail of a small pink sock fluttering from a creosote bush. Sometimes the greatest miracles arrive in the most ordinary packages. A child's sock, 4 sets of small footprints in desert sand, and the sudden opportunity to transform devastating loss into a new beginning. The morning Ethan decided to come forward about the children dawned with an uncharacteristic cloudiness over the Sonoran Desert. Grey skies mirrored his apprehension as he packed the children into his truck for the 90-minute drive to Tucson. Maria sat in the front passenger seat, her back straight, eyes fixed on the road ahead, with a stoicism no 11-year-old should have mastered. In the back seat, Diego kept the twins distracted with a game involving counting saguaro cacti, his protective instinct toward his younger sisters evident in every gentle redirection of their attention. "Remember what we practiced," Ethan said as they approached the city limits. "If anyone asks questions before my lawyer arrives, you say only your names and that you want to speak with me and Mr. Whitaker." Maria nodded solemnly. "We understand. We say nothing else." James Whitaker had arranged everything meticulously. They would first report to the Pima County Sheriff's Department, where an officer James trusted would take initial statements. The children would be temporarily placed in emergency foster care, unavoidable despite Ethan's protests, while the legal process began. James had already filed emergency guardianship paperwork and had arranged for a sympathetic judge to hear the case within 48 hours. "Best case scenario," James had explained, "you get temporary guardianship while the immigration issues proceed. Worst case, they enter the system completely. On the way, coming forward voluntarily puts you in a better position than being discovered harboring them." The sheriff's station loomed ahead, its institutional architecture a stark contrast to the natural landscape where they'd formed their tentative bonds. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "This is the right thing," he said, though whether he was reassuring the children or himself remained unclear. What followed was every bit as difficult as Ethan had feared. Despite James's preparation, the system's machinery proved coldly efficient. The children were immediately separated from Ethan for questioning. Social workers appeared with forms and protocols. Border Patrol agents arrived to document the undocumented minors. James ran interference where possible, but many procedures simply couldn't be circumvented. The most heart-wrenching moment came when the social workers explained the children needed to go to emergency placement homes, separate ones, due to availability issues. "No!" Diego shouted, the first time Ethan had heard the normally quiet boy raise his voice. "We stay together! We promised Mama!" Maria, tears streaming silently down her face, pulled her siblings into a protective circle, her slender arms somehow stretching to encompass all three of them. "Please," she begged Ethan. "You promised!" Ethan turned desperately to James, who was already on his phone, stepping away to make urgent calls. The social workers waited with professional detachment that did nothing to mask the underlying compassion. In their eyes, they'd seen this scene before, families separated by systems too rigid to bend, even when bending might be the more humane option. 48 hours! Ethan knelt to Maria's level. "James is doing everything possible. 2 days, and we'll be in front of a judge who can help us. I swear to you, I will not stop fighting to bring you all back together." The twins began sobbing, as understanding dawned on them. Sofia clung to Elena, their identical faces mirror images of fear and confusion. Diego stepped forward, placing himself between his sisters and the waiting social workers. "I take care of them," he insisted, his English breaking down under stress. "Always I take care of them." Ethan felt something crack inside his chest, the protective shell he'd built around his heart after Rebecca's death, splintering completely in the face of these children's desperation. He pulled Diego into a fierce hug. "I know you do," he whispered, "and you've done an amazing job, but right now I need you to be brave in a different way. Trust me to fix this. 2 days. I promise." The social workers finally intervened, gently but firmly separating the children. Professional as they were, even they seemed affected by the scene. One quietly assured Ethan they would make phone calls to try ensuring the children could at least speak to each other during the separation. As the children were led away, Maria looked back once, her eyes meeting Ethan's with a silent question he could only answer with a determined nod. "Yes, I will come for you. Yes, I will make this right." When they were gone, Ethan collapsed into a chair in the station's waiting area, his head in his hands. James sat beside him, his normally composed attorney demeanor showing cracks of genuine concern. "That was," James began. "Barbaric," Ethan finished. "They've already lost their parents. They survived the desert by staying together. And our first act is to tear them apart again?" "It's temporary," James assured him. "Judge Ramirez is sympathetic to these cases. She understands the realities facing unaccompanied minors. We have a strong position for emergency guardianship. And if she says no," James didn't sugarcoat it, "then we appeal and we fight through regular channels. It takes longer, but there are still options." The next 48 hours were the longest of Ethan's life. He stayed in a hotel in Tucson, unable to bear returning to his cabin without the children. Their absence felt like a physical ache, surprising in its intensity given how briefly they'd been in his life. He found himself worrying constantly. Was Diego protecting himself by staying silent rather than revealing too much? Were the twins sleeping or crying for their siblings? Was Maria shouldering too much responsibility as usual? James worked tirelessly, coordinating with the children's assigned advocate, gathering character references from Ethan's former search and rescue colleagues, and preparing documentation showing Ethan's financial stability and suitability as a guardian. Manuel and Josefina Flores provided statements attesting to Ethan's character and his positive interactions with the children. One more piece would help significantly, James mentioned during a preparation session. Any connection to Rebecca that supports this petition, something showing she would have approved of this course of action. Ethan thought immediately of Rebecca's journals. His wife had documented everything, from their work photographing endangered species to her battle with cancer. He'd been unable to read them after her death, the pain still too raw. But now he found himself calling Manuel and asking the elder to retrieve a specific leather-bound book from his bedside drawer. When the journal arrived via Manuel's grandson, Ethan finally forced himself to open it. Rebecca's handwriting, neat, slightly slanted to the right, jumped from the page, bringing her presence so vividly into the hotel room that he had to pause several times to collect himself. He found what he needed near the end, in entries made during her final months. Rebecca had written about their decision not to have children, initially a career choice that became irrelevant after her diagnosis. But more importantly, she'd written about their discussions regarding what would happen to Ethan after she was gone. E talks about isolation, about retreating to the cabin permanently, she'd written. I worry for him. His capacity for love is his greatest strength, but without an outlet, it could become his prison. He needs purpose beyond grief, connections that force him outward rather than inward. If children had been our path, he would have been an extraordinary father, patient, kind, protective in the best ways. I hope somehow he finds that part of himself, even when I'm gone. Ethan read the passage to James, his voice breaking several times. This is perfect, James said quietly. It speaks directly to her belief in your capabilities as a potential parent, despite your own doubts. The courtroom the following morning felt unnaturally bright, its fluorescent lighting harsh after days of emotional darkness. Judge Elena, Ramirez, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, reviewed their documentation with careful attention while Ethan tried not to fidget in his seat. The children weren't present, a standard procedure for initial hearings that nevertheless amplified Ethan's anxiety. When she finally looked up, her expression revealed nothing of her thoughts. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, "this is an unusual case in many respects. You found these children approximately 3 weeks ago and made the decision to shelter them, rather than immediately report to authorities. While I understand your stated humanitarian motivations, I must consider whether this initial choice reflects good judgment on your part." Ethan's stomach tightened. James had warned him this would be a sticking point. Furthermore, Judge Ramirez continued, you have no experience as a parent, no prior relationship with these children, and your home is extremely isolated. The children speak limited English, have experienced severe trauma, and will require extensive support services. What makes you believe you are the appropriate guardian for them? It was the fundamental question, the one Ethan had been asking himself since that first day beneath Shadow Rock. He took a deep breath, abandoning the carefully prepared statement James had crafted. Your Honor, I don't know that I am the appropriate guardian by any conventional measure, he began honestly. I'm a widower still processing my own grief. I live miles from the nearest town. Until 3 weeks ago, my experience with children was limited to occasionally teaching wilderness photography to school groups. Judge Ramirez's eyebrow rose slightly at this unconventional opening. But here's what I do know, Ethan continued. These children survived unimaginable circumstances by relying on each other. Their parents died getting them to safety. When I found them, they were dehydrated, terrified, and still fighting to stay alive. Together. In the weeks they've been with me, I've watched Diego teach himself English by poring over my field guides. I've seen the twins slowly emerge from silent terror to curious exploration. I've witnessed Maria's extraordinary capacity to protect and nurture despite being a child herself. He paused, gathering his thoughts. What makes me the right guardian isn't my qualifications on paper. It's that these specific children, through whatever cosmic coincidence or divine intervention you might believe in, found me at exactly the moment when both they and I needed someone to remind us that survival isn't enough, that human connection is what makes survival meaningful. He reached for Rebecca's journal, which James had entered as evidence. My late wife wrote that my capacity for love needed an outlet beyond grief. These children provided that, and I believe I can provide what they need most: stability, safety, and the absolute commitment that they will remain together as their parents wished. Judge Ramirez studied him for a long moment, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. Mr. Whitaker, she turned to James, what is the status of the Special Immigrant Juvenile Status Petition? Filed yesterday, Your Honor, James replied. The children clearly meet the criteria of having suffered parental abandonment through death and facing likely harm if returned to Guatemala. Mr. Blackwood's petition for guardianship is the necessary predicate for that relief. The judge reviewed additional documents, making occasional notes. The minutes stretched painfully as Ethan tried to read her inscrutable expression. I am granting temporary emergency guardianship to Mr. Blackwood, she finally announced. This is provisional for 90 days, during which time regular home visits by social services will be required. The children will need trauma counseling, English language support, and eventual school enrollment. Mr. Blackwood, you will need to complete foster parent certification classes. Ethan felt lightheaded with relief. However, she continued, her tone sharpening, I want to be absolutely clear. This temporary arrangement does not guarantee permanent guardianship, nor does it resolve their immigration status. Those are separate proceedings with different standards. Do you understand this? Yes, Your Honor, Ethan replied. I understand this is just the first step. A significant first step, she corrected, her stern demeanor momentarily softening. These children have experienced extraordinary trauma. Stability is crucial to their recovery. The court's primary concern is their welfare, which for now appears best served by keeping them together in your care while the legal process continues. 2 hours later, after processing paperwork that seemed endless, Ethan waited in a conference room at the Department of Child Safety. The door opened, and Maria entered first, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Ethan. The carefully maintained composure she'd shown throughout their ordeal cracked as she ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist with a sob of relief. Diego followed, leading the twins by their hands. The younger boy's eyes were red-rimmed but dry, his shoulders squared with determined dignity even as he pressed against Ethan's side. Sofia and Elena clung to each other as always, but for the first time they reached for Ethan without hesitation, their small hands grasping his with complete trust. "You came back," Maria whispered in Spanish. "You really came back." "I promised, didn't I?" Ethan replied, his throat tight with emotion. "We're going home, all of us, together." The social worker who had accompanied the children smiled at the reunion. Judge Ramirez expedited the release process. She rarely does that. "Thank her for me," Ethan said, still surrounded by the children who seemed unwilling to break physical contact with him or each other. "I think what you said in court affected her more than she let on," the social worker confided. "Just so you know, these next few months won't be easy. There will be many requirements, many appointments, many adjustments." "We can handle it," Ethan replied, looking down at the four faces now turned toward him with cautious hope. "We've all survived worse." The drive back to the cabin felt entirely different from their tense journey into Tucson. Though the legal challenges ahead remained, daunting, the immediate crisis had passed. The children gradually relaxed as the city gave way to desert landscapes, the familiar terrain somehow now representing safety rather than danger. "Will we stay at your house forever?" Diego asked, his English improving daily through sheer determination. "That's the plan," Ethan answered carefully. "There are more steps in the process, more people who will need to agree, but that's what I'm working for." "And we go to school?" Elena asked, one of the few complete English sentences she had mastered. "Yes, eventually. For now, we'll start with home learning while your English gets stronger. Josefina has offered to help with lessons." Maria had been quietly looking out the window, processing everything in her thoughtful way. "The judge," she finally said. She could still say no later. Ethan wouldn't lie to her. "Yes, but James, Mr. Whitaker, believes we have a strong case, especially if these first few months go well." Maria nodded, absorbing this reality with the same resilience she had shown throughout their ordeal. "Then we will make them go well," she said simply, as if success were merely a matter of sufficient determination. Manuel and Josefina were waiting at the cabin when they arrived, the elderly couple having prepared a welcome home meal that filled the small house with delicious aromas. The children rushed to greet them, especially the twins, who had formed a particular bond with Josefina during their previous stay. "The house felt empty without the little ones," Manuel observed, as he helped Ethan unload supplies from the truck. Even after just 2 days, the silence was too loud. "I felt it too," Ethan admitted. "I never expected to become so attached so quickly." Manuel smiled knowingly. The heart doesn't consult calendars before it decides to care. When the connection is right, time becomes meaningless. That evening, after a celebratory dinner and the excitement of reuniting in their desert sanctuary, Ethan faced the first of many practical challenges: sleeping arrangements. His one-bedroom cabin had been adequate for a temporary situation, but clearly wouldn't work long-term for 5 people. "We need to expand," he told the children as they helped clean up after dinner. "Add rooms to make space for everyone." Diego's eyes widened with interest. "You will build. I can help. My father was a carpenter in Guatemala before." He trailed off, the memory still painful. "I'd appreciate that help," Ethan replied gently. "I'm pretty handy, but I've never added entire rooms before. We'll learn together." That night, with the children finally asleep, all 4 insisted on camping in the living room rather than being separated again. Ethan sat on his porch swing and contemplated the extraordinary turn his life had taken. A month ago, he had been a grieving widower whose days stretched before him in empty sameness. Now he was responsible for 4 young lives, engaged in a complex legal battle and planning home renovations to accommodate a suddenly expanded family. The weight of this responsibility should have felt crushing. Instead, it felt like purpose, something he had lost with Rebecca's death and never expected to find again, certainly not in the form of 4 orphaned children from Guatemala. "You'd be laughing at this plot twist, Beck," he whispered to the star-filled sky. "Or maybe you somehow orchestrated it. Either way, I think you'd approve." The following weeks established new rhythms and routines. James had connected Ethan with a trauma specialist who traveled from Tucson twice weekly to work with the children. Dr. Levine, a compassionate woman with extensive experience helping immigrant children, conducted both individual and group sessions, sometimes including Ethan to build family bonds. "They're remarkably resilient," she told Ethan after the 3rd week of therapy. "But their trauma runs deep. Maria particularly has taken on an adult role for so long that allowing herself to be a child again is challenging for her. The twins still have nightmares about being separated. Diego is struggling with guilt. He believes he should have somehow saved his parents." "What can I do?" Ethan asked, the magnitude of their emotional needs sometimes overwhelming him. "What you're already doing, providing consistency, safety, affection without pressure. But also, find ways to gently return childhood to them. Play, creativity, joy without purpose. These are healing experiences for traumatized children." Ethan took this advice to heart, introducing activities that had no productive value beyond fun. He taught them to skip stones across the small seasonal pond near the property. He built a tire swing from an old spare and hung it from the largest mesquite tree. He demonstrated how to make shadow puppets on the wall using the desert sunset as a light source. At first, the children approached these activities with confusion, particularly Maria, who had been focused on survival for so long that play seemed foreign. But gradually, moments of genuine childhood joy began to emerge. Diego developed a passionate interest in Ethan's photography equipment, spending hours experimenting with the older cameras Ethan gave him. The twins created elaborate games involving the native plants around the cabin, assigning personalities to different cacti and shrubs. Even Maria occasionally forgot to be vigilant and responsible, losing herself in drawing detailed pictures of their new home. Manuel and Josefina became regular fixtures in their expanding family circle, providing cultural continuity and practical assistance. Josefina taught the children traditional songs and helped with Spanish language education, while Manuel shared indigenous knowledge about the desert environment, which plants were edible, which had medicinal properties, how to read weather patterns in cloud formations and animal behavior. "The desert tried to take their lives," Manuel observed, as he showed Diego how to identify water-storing plants. "Now it will help sustain them. This is balance." Ethan's former search and rescue colleagues, once they learned of his situation, rallied with surprising support. Rick Sandoval, now a deputy sheriff, helped navigate the bureaucratic complexities of the children's documentation. Sarah Littlefeather, who had left search and rescue to become a teacher, offered assistance with educational planning. Their support reminded Ethan of the community he had withdrawn from after Rebecca's death, connections that now proved invaluable. As he built a new life, the cabin expansion project became a family endeavor that taught lessons beyond construction. Diego proved to have inherited his father's carpentry skills, his small hands surprisingly capable with tools under Ethan's careful supervision. Maria revealed an unexpected talent for design, sketching room layouts that maximized the limited space. Even the twins contributed, decorating river stones to create a pathway between the original cabin and the new addition. "My father would "Be proud," Diego said quietly one afternoon as he helped Ethan install a window in what would become the girls' bedroom. "He wanted to build us a house in America." Ethan rested his hand on the boy's shoulder. "He did build you a house, Diego. Not with his hands, but with his courage and sacrifice. We're just finishing what he started." The paperwork and legal processes continued relentlessly in the background of their daily life. Each week brought new forms, new interviews, new requirements. The children's SIJS applications progressed slowly through the system. Their temporary documentation allowed them to receive medical care and eventually enroll in school, but the uncertainty of their final status remained a constant shadow. James called regularly with updates, his initially professional interest in the case having evolved into genuine investment in the children's welfare. "Judge Ramirez has scheduled the permanent guardianship hearing for next month," he informed Ethan one evening. "The home study reports have been positive, and Dr. Levine's assessments support your petition strongly. I'm cautiously optimistic." "And the immigration status?" Ethan asked the question that kept him awake at night. "That's moving on a different timeline," James admitted. "SIJS cases are backlogged, but having permanent guardianship will strengthen their position significantly. One step at a time, Ethan. One step at a time became their family motto, applied to everything from legal challenges to Diego's English lessons to the twins' gradual willingness to sleep in their own beds. Small victories accumulated. Maria laughed without immediately catching herself. Diego went a full day without checking the locks repeatedly. The twins separated voluntarily for short periods without anxiety. Ethan went hours without thinking about Rebecca's absence, and when he did, the pain was tinged with gratitude rather than only grief. 3 months after the children had entered his life, Ethan received an unexpected package from the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Inside were personal effects recovered from the children's parents, wedding rings, a water-damaged family photograph, a small Bible with handwritten notes in the margins, and a sealed letter addressed to Mis hijos, queridos, my beloved children. Ethan called Maria to his workshop behind the cabin, where he had been mounting prints from their recent photography excursion. "These belong to your parents," he said gently, showing her the items. "The authorities recovered them from where we found them." Maria touched the items reverently, her fingers lingering on the sealed letter. "It's Mama's handwriting," she whispered. "Would you like me to leave you alone with these things? Or would you like me to stay while you look at them?" She considered the question with her characteristic thoughtfulness. "Stay," she finally decided. "These are family things. You are family now too." The simple statement, "You are family now too," hit Ethan with unexpected force. Despite all the paperwork, all the legal processes aimed at making that exact status official, hearing it stated so matter-of-factly by this solemn 11-year-old made it suddenly, undeniably real. Together, they carefully opened the water-damaged letter. The handwriting was faint but legible, a mother's final thoughts to her children in case the worst happened during their journey. Maria translated haltingly, tears streaming down her face as she read her mother's words of love, hope, and guidance. The final paragraph caught Ethan's attention particularly. "If God's plan takes us from you," Maria translated, "know that He will not leave you alone. Look for the helpers, the kind hands, the good hearts. They are your new family until we meet again in heaven. Trust them as you would trust us." Maria looked up at Ethan, her dark eyes meeting his. "She knew," she said simply. "Somehow she knew someone would find us." "Your mother's faith brought you through the desert," Ethan replied. "Maybe it led me to that pink sock too." That evening they gathered all 4 children to share their parents' recovered possessions. Diego held his father's wedding ring with reverence, while the twins examined the family photograph with wonder, as if rediscovering faces that had begun to fade from memory. Together, they decided to create a small memorial shelf in the living room where these precious items would remain visible daily, honoring the past while embracing their new future. As they completed this impromptu ceremony, Maria suddenly asked, "Can we see the photographs of Rebecca, your wife?" The question startled Ethan. He had kept Rebecca's photographs displayed in his bedroom, but nowhere else in the cabin, unsure if seeing another lost parent might trigger the children's grief. "I'd like that," he said after a moment. "She would have loved all of you. I think it's time you got to know her too." He retrieved his favorite albums, and they spent the evening looking through photographs of Rebecca, hiking desert trails, photographing wildlife, laughing on their cabin porch. Through the children's questions and Ethan's stories, Rebecca's presence filled the room not as a ghost of grief, but as a beloved ancestor of their newly formed family. "She's pretty," Elena observed, touching a photograph of Rebecca beside a blooming saguaro. "She is smiling like you," Sofia added, pointing to Ethan's face in a candid shot Rebecca had taken. "Did she like children?" Diego asked the question that perhaps concerned him most. "Very much," Ethan answered honestly. "We decided not to have our own for various reasons, but she loved working with children during our community photography workshops." Maria, observant as always, noticed something in one of the photos. "What are those flowers, the purple ones?" "Ironwood blossoms," Ethan explained. "That's what I was looking for the day I found you. An ironwood grove in bloom. It was an annual tradition for Rebecca and me." The children exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. "Next year," Maria said decisively, "we will all go together to photograph the ironwood flowers for Rebecca, a new family tradition." In that moment, surrounded by photographs of his past love and the unexpected children who had brought purpose back to his life, Ethan recognized the miracle hidden within tragedy. From the desert that had claimed so much, Rebecca to cancer, the children's parents to dehydration, all of them to grief, had somehow emerged a second chance at family, at connection, at meaning beyond mere survival. The path ahead remained uncertain. Legal hurdles, cultural adjustments, and the children's ongoing trauma recovery would challenge them for years to come. But as Diego leaned against his shoulder, the twins curled together, examining Rebecca's photographs, and Maria carefully arranged the recovered family mementos beside pictures of Rebecca. Ethan understood that they had already succeeded in the most important way. They had transformed the desert's cruelty into unexpected blessing, creating family from fragments and finding in each other's brokenness the perfect pieces to build something new and beautiful. In the scorching Sonoran Desert of Arizona, summer of 2005, a tragedy unfolded that would have normally been recorded as just another heartbreaking statistic in the harsh realities of border crossings. The desperate journey of the Hernandez family ended in devastation when their water ran out 3 days into their trek, leaving 4 children alone in the merciless desert heat. At least that's what Border Patrol agents reported after finding scattered belongings and 2 adult bodies. But what they failed to discover were the 4 Hernandez children, Maria, 11, Diego, 9, twins Sofia and Elena, 6, who had wandered away from the scene following their mother's final instruction to find shade and wait for help. Their remarkable story of survival against impossible odds remained buried for months, preserved only in their memories, scattered reports from local tribes, and eventually through documentation at the Arizona Department of Child Safety. This is the forgotten saga of how 4 young children endured the desert's extreme conditions and how the intervention of a grieving widower named Ethan Blackwood gave them a second chance when the world had already written their obituaries. The morning Ethan decided to come forward about the children dawned with an uncharacteristic cloudiness over the Sonoran Desert. Grey skies mirrored his apprehension as he packed the children into his truck for the 90-minute drive to Tucson. Maria sat in the front passenger seat, her back straight, eyes fixed on the road ahead, with a stoicism no 11-year-old should have mastered. In the back seat, Diego kept the twins distracted with a game involving counting saguaro cacti, his protective instinct toward his younger sisters evident in every gentle redirection of their attention. "Remember what we practiced," Ethan said as they approached the city limits. "If anyone asks questions before my lawyer arrives, you say only, 'Your names and that you want to speak with me and Mr. Whitaker.'" Maria nodded solemnly. "We understand. We say nothing else." James Whitaker had arranged everything meticulously. They would first report to the Pima County Sheriff's Department, where an officer James trusted would take initial statements. The children would be temporarily placed in emergency foster care, unavoidable despite Ethan's protests, while the legal process began. James had already filed emergency guardianship paperwork and had arranged for a sympathetic judge to hear the case within 48 hours. "Best case scenario," James had explained, "you get temporary guardianship while the immigration issues proceed. Worst case, they enter the system completely. Either way, coming forward voluntarily puts you in a better position than being discovered harboring them." The sheriff's station loomed ahead, its institutional architecture a stark contrast to the natural landscape where they'd formed their tentative bonds. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "This is the right thing," he said, though whether he was reassuring the children or himself remained unclear. What followed was every bit as difficult as Ethan had feared. Despite James's preparation, the system's machinery proved coldly efficient. The children were immediately separated from Ethan for questioning. Social workers appeared, with forms and protocols. Border Patrol agents arrived to document the undocumented minors. James ran interference where possible, but many procedures simply couldn't be circumvented. The most heart-wrenching moment came when the social workers explained the children needed to go to emergency placement homes, separate ones due to availability issues. "No!" Diego shouted, the first time Ethan had heard the normally quiet boy raise his voice. "We stay together. We promised Mama." Maria, tears streaming silently down her face, pulled her siblings into a protective circle, her slender arms somehow stretching to encompass all three of them. "Please," she begged Ethan, "you promised." Ethan turned desperately to James, who was already on his phone, stepping away to make urgent calls. The social workers waited with professional detachment that did nothing to mask the underlying compassion in their eyes. They'd seen this scene before, families separated by systems too rigid to bend, even when bending might be the more humane option. 48 hours, Ethan knelt to Maria's level. "James is doing everything possible. 2 days, and we'll be in front of a judge who can help us. I swear to you, I will not stop fighting to bring you all back together." The twins began sobbing, as understanding dawned on them. Sofia clung to Elena, their identical faces mirror images of fear and confusion. Diego stepped forward, placing himself between his sisters and the waiting social workers. "I take care of them," he insisted, his English breaking down under stress. "Always I take care of them." Ethan felt something crack inside his chest. The protective shell he'd built around his heart after Rebecca's death, splintering completely in the face of these children's desperation. He pulled Diego into a fierce hug. "I know you do," he whispered, "and you've done an amazing job, but right now I need you to be brave in a different way. Trust me to fix this. 2 days, I promise." The social workers finally intervened, gently but firmly separating the children. Professional as they were, even they seemed affected by the scene. One quietly assured Ethan they would make phone calls to try ensuring the children could at least speak to each other during the separation. As the children were led away, Maria looked back once, her eyes meeting Ethan's with a silent question. He could only answer with a determined nod. "Yes, I will come for you. Yes, I will make this right." When they were gone, Ethan collapsed into a chair in the station's waiting area, his head in his hands. James sat beside him, his normally composed attorney demeanor showing cracks of genuine concern. "That was," James began. "Barbaric," Ethan finished. "They've already lost their parents. They survived the desert by staying together. And our first act is to tear them apart again." "It's temporary," James assured him. "Judge Ramirez is sympathetic to these cases. She understands the realities facing unaccompanied minors. We have a strong position for emergency guardianship. And if she says no?" James didn't sugarcoat it. "Then we appeal and we fight through regular channels. It takes longer, but there are still options." The next 48 hours were the longest of Ethan's life. He stayed in a hotel in Tucson, unable to bear returning to his cabin without the children. Their absence felt like a physical ache, surprising in its intensity given how briefly they'd been in his life. He found himself worrying constantly. Was Diego protecting himself by staying silent rather than revealing too much? Were the twins sleeping or crying for their siblings? Was Maria shouldering too much responsibility, as usual? James worked tirelessly, coordinating with the children's assigned advocate, gathering character references from Ethan's former search and rescue colleagues, and preparing documentation showing Ethan's financial stability and suitability as a guardian. Manuel and Josefina Flores provided statements attesting to Ethan's character and his positive interactions with the children. "One more piece would help significantly," James mentioned during a preparation session. "Any connection to Rebecca that supports this petition, something showing she would have approved of this course of action." Ethan thought immediately of Rebecca's journals. His wife had documented everything, from their work photographing endangered species to her battle with cancer. He'd been unable to read them after her death, the pain still too raw, but now he found himself calling Manuel and asking the elder to retrieve a specific leather-bound book from his bedside drawer. When the journal arrived via Manuel's grandson, Ethan finally forced himself to open it. Rebecca's handwriting, neat, slightly slanted to the right, jumped from the page, bringing her presence so vividly into the hotel room that he had to pause several times to collect himself. He found what he needed near the end, in entries made during her final months. Rebecca had written about their decision not to have children, initially a career choice that became irrelevant after her diagnosis. But more importantly, she'd written about their discussions regarding what would happen to Ethan after she was gone. E talks about isolation, about retreating to the cabin permanently, she'd written. "I worry for him. His capacity for love is his greatest strength, but without an outlet, it could become his prison. He needs purpose beyond grief, connections that force him outward rather than inward. If children had been our path, he would have been an extraordinary father, patient, kind, protective in the best ways. I hope somehow he finds that part of himself, even when I'm gone." Ethan read the passage to James, his voice breaking, several times. 6 months after that pivotal court hearing, Ethan stood on the newly constructed back deck of his expanded cabin, watching the children playing in the yard. The transformation of both the property and its inhabitants seemed almost miraculous when he allowed himself to step back and truly observe it. What had once been a sparse bachelor retreat was now unquestionably a family home, with the original cabin seamlessly connected to a new wing that provided bedrooms for each child, a proper study space, and an expanded kitchen where they gathered for meals and homework. "They're thriving," Dr. Levine commented, joining him at the railing. The trauma specialist had reduced her visits to monthly check-ins, though she remained on call for any crises. "You've created something remarkable." "Here, Ethan?" He shook his head slightly. "We created it together." I'm still amazed they trust me after everything they've been through. Dr. Levine smiled. Children are incredibly resilient when given the right environment. They've found safety with you, and that's allowed their natural resilience to flourish. In the yard, Diego was teaching the twins how to identify animal tracks in the sandy soil, his once halting English now flowing naturally as he patiently explained the difference between coyote and rabbit prints. At 11, he had developed a passion for wildlife that mirrored Ethan's, often accompanying him on photography expeditions and showing a natural talent for spotting elusive desert creatures. Nearby, Maria sat cross-legged under the shade of a mesquite tree, sketching in the art journal Ethan had given her for her 12th birthday. Her artistic abilities had blossomed under the gentle encouragement of her art teacher at the small charter school in Ajo, where all 4 children now attended. Though still serious beyond her years, she had slowly embraced moments of ordinary childhood, particularly through her artwork. Maria's latest psychological evaluation shows significant improvement, Dr. Levine noted. The hypervigilance has decreased, and she's forming healthy peer relationships at school. The nightmares are less frequent. Still there, though, Ethan replied, thinking of the nights he still woke to her quiet crying, the shadow of loss never entirely absent from their lives. That's normal and expected, Dr. Levine assured him. Trauma doesn't simply disappear, but we learn to carry it differently. You've taught them it's safe to feel their grief without being consumed by it. This observation struck Ethan particularly. In helping the children navigate their loss, he had inadvertently found healthier ways to carry his own grief for Rebecca. The paralyzing despair that had once defined his days had transformed into a gentler melancholy that could coexist with joy, purpose, and hope. We have the final guardianship hearing next week, Ethan said, changing the subject. James seems optimistic. As he should be. Your home studies have been exemplary. The children's progress is well documented, and Judge Ramirez has seen consistent evidence of a stable, nurturing environment. The special immigrant juvenile status approvals should follow, though that timeline remains less predictable. The immigration aspect of their situation remained the most uncertain. Though the children had received temporary protected status, the final approval of their SIJS applications would determine whether they could remain permanently in the United States. James had warned that the process could take years, but each successful hearing brought them closer to security. Diego asked me something important last night, Ethan said quietly. He wanted to know if they could take my last name when everything is finalized, if they could be Blackwoods. Dr. Levine's expression softened. What did you tell him? That I would be honored, but that keeping their parents' name was also a valid choice. That names are important carriers of identity and history. Ethan paused, still processing his own complex emotions about the request. I told him to talk with his siblings and that whatever they decided would be perfect. A wise answer, Dr. Levine approved. Supporting their agency in these decisions helps rebuild what trauma took from them, their sense of control over their own lives. As they continued discussing the children's progress, Maria approached the deck, her sketchbook held protectively against her chest. Though more open than she had been initially, she still guarded her artwork carefully, sharing it selectively and only when she felt ready. Dr. Levine, she said, with the formal politeness that characterized her interactions with adults outside the immediate family, may I show you something I drew? I'd be honored, Maria, the therapist replied, matching the girl's serious tone. While offering an encouraging smile, Maria carefully opened her sketchbook to reveal a detailed drawing of 5 figures standing before a stylized desert landscape. Four smaller figures, clearly representing herself, Diego, and the twins, stood beside a taller figure identifiable as Ethan by the camera hanging around his neck. Behind them, rendered in lighter strokes almost like ghosts, stood two adult figures that Ethan recognized immediately as representations of the children's parents. "It's beautiful," Dr. Levine said softly. "You've captured so much feeling in this picture." Maria nodded, her dark eyes meeting Ethan's. "It's called Two Families Becoming One. I want to enter it in the school art contest." The simple title caught Ethan by surprise, expressing so perfectly what they had been building together over these months. Not a replacement for what was lost, but a new constellation formed from the fragments of broken families, with the past honored rather than erased. "I think it's perfect," Ethan managed, emotion tightening his throat. "Your parents would be very proud of you, Maria." She smiled, one of those rare, unguarded smiles that transformed her serious face into that of the child she truly was. "I think they would be proud of all of us, for finding each other, for not giving up." After Dr. Levine departed, Ethan called the children together for their weekly family meeting, a tradition they had established to discuss upcoming events, address any concerns, and celebrate achievements. These structured conversations had proven valuable in building trust and ensuring everyone's voice was heard, regardless of age. "First agenda item," Ethan began once they were settled around the kitchen table. "Next week's guardianship hearing. James has prepared us well, but does anyone have questions or worries about it?" Elena raised her hand, a habit from school she maintained at home. At 7, she remained the quietest of the twins, but had developed more independence over the months. "Will the judge ask us questions again?" "Yes," Ethan answered honestly, "but similar ones to last time. How you're doing at school, how you like living here, if you feel safe and happy. There are no wrong answers, just your truth." Diego, sprawled in his chair with the lanky ease of a boy approaching adolescence, asked the question that had clearly been weighing on him. "What about the name thing? Did you think about it?" "I did," Ethan replied, "and I meant what I said last night. If you want to become Blackwoods legally, I would be honored, but keeping Hernandez honors your parents and your heritage. It's completely your choice, individually or as a group." The children exchanged glances, some silent communication, passing between them that Ethan had learned to recognize but not interrupt. Finally, Maria spoke for the group. "We talked about it last night after you went to bed," she admitted. "We want to be Hernandez Blackwood, both families together." The hyphenated solution hadn't occurred to Ethan, but its perfect symbolism brought a smile to his face. "That sounds perfect. I'll tell James to include it in the paperwork." Sofia, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly blurted, "Will you adopt us after the guardianship?" Like real adoption. Angela at school says her stepdad adopted her, and now he's her real dad forever. The question created an immediate stillness in the room. They had discussed guardianship extensively, but formal adoption remained a more complex topic, both legally given their immigration status and emotionally as it implied a replacement rather than an addition to their family structure. Ethan chose his words carefully. "Adoption is definitely possible in the future, if that's what you all want. Legally, we need to finalize your immigration status first. But more importantly, I would never want to replace your parents or erase that relationship. Your mother and father will always be your parents, even if I'm also your parent in a different way." "Like in Maria's drawing," Diego said unexpectedly. "Two families becoming one." Maria looked surprised that her brother had understood her artistic intention so clearly. Ethan was learning that the siblings often perceived more about each other than they expressed directly, a bond forged through shared trauma and survival. "Exactly like that," Ethan agreed. "We don't have to rush any decisions. We can take each step as it comes. See what feels right for all of us." The conversation shifted to more immediate concerns: the twins' upcoming science fair project, Diego's request to join the soccer team, Maria's art contest submission. The ordinary concerns of childhood that had seemed impossibly distant during those first desperate days now formed the comfortable rhythm of their family life. Later that evening, after the younger children were in bed, Ethan found Maria sitting on the front porch, gazing at the star-filled desert sky. At 12, she occupied a unique position in their family structure, too young to be an adult, but carrying responsibilities and memories beyond her years. He had learned to respect this liminality, to offer parental guidance without diminishing her hard-won wisdom. "Beautiful night," he commented, settling beside her on the porch swing. "I never get tired of these stars. Mama used to say the stars are windows where angels watch us," Maria replied softly. "Sometimes I talk to her and Papa, tell them about our day." "I talk to Rebecca too," Ethan admitted. "Not as often as I used to, but still sometimes." Maria considered this thoughtfully. "Does it make you sad?" "Not like before. Now it's more peaceful, like keeping a connection that changed form but didn't disappear completely." They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, the gentle creaking of the porch swing the only sound beyond the distant calls of night creatures. "I remember everything, you know," Maria finally said. "The desert. Finding them, not waking. Up, taking care of the others. Sometimes I wish I could forget parts, but I also don't want to forget them." Ethan nodded, understanding perfectly this complex relationship with painful memories. The hardest memories are often connected to the people we love most. Forgetting the pain means risking forgetting pieces of them too. "Exactly," she agreed, sounding momentarily older than her years. "But it's easier now. Before you found, us remembering hurt so much I could barely breathe. Now I can remember and still breathe." The simple description struck Ethan as profoundly accurate. That's exactly how it felt after Rebecca died, like grief was stealing my breath. And then somehow you four came along and reminded me how to breathe again. Maria leaned slightly against his shoulder, one of those small physical connections that had developed naturally over time, never forced but increasingly comfortable. "Do you think that's why we found each other? Because we all needed to remember how to breathe?" "I do," Ethan replied, seeing no reason to simplify his answer despite her age. "Some might call it coincidence that I decided to look for ironwood, blossoms that exact day, or that you followed your mother's instructions to find shade in that precise location. But it feels like more than coincidence to me." "Manuel says the desert has its own wisdom," Maria offered, "that it knows what belongs together." "Manuel is a very wise man," Ethan agreed, "much wiser than me." Maria smiled at this. "He says, you're wise too, just in a different way, that you listen with your heart." She paused, gathering courage for her next words. "I wrote something for the hearing. The judge said last time we could bring statements if we wanted." "You did? That's wonderful, Maria. Would you read it? Tell me if it's okay?" "Of course," Ethan replied, touched by her request for his opinion. She retrieved a folded paper from her pocket and handed it to him with uncharacteristic shyness. In the light spilling from the cabin windows, Ethan read her careful handwriting. "Dear Judge Ramirez, my name is Maria Hernandez, and I am writing about our family. Before the desert we were 6. Mama, Papa, me, Diego, Sofia, and Elena. After the desert took Mama and Papa, we were 4, and we were very afraid. Then Mr. Ethan found us, and slowly we became 5 again, but a different 5. Some people might think we need parents who speak Spanish perfectly, or who look like us, or who knew us from when we were babies. But what we really needed was someone brave enough to find us in the desert, patient enough to help us trust again, and kind enough to make room in his heart when his heart was already hurting. Mr. Ethan doesn't try to make us forget our parents. He helps us remember them in ways that don't hurt so much. He puts their picture next to his wife Rebecca's picture and says we all belong to each other now. He is teaching Diego about cameras, helping the twins not be so afraid, and showing me that being strong doesn't mean I can't also sometimes be just a kid. Please let us stay together as Hernandez Blackwoods. We have already lost too much to lose each other too. Thank you for listening, Maria. Ethan had to blink rapidly to clear his vision as he finished reading. The simple eloquence of her words captured everything he hoped to provide for these children. Not replacement, but continuation. Not forgetting, but healing. Maria, this is beautiful, he said, returning the letter with gentle reverence. Just perfect as it is. She took the paper, relief evident in her expression. I wasn't sure if it was okay to mention Rebecca. Rebecca is part of our story, Ethan assured her, just like your parents are. No one we truly love is ever really gone from our family narrative. The hearing the following week proceeded exactly as James had predicted, thorough but positive, with Judge Ramirez particularly moved by the children's statements. Maria read her letter with quiet dignity. Diego spoke about his growing interest in wildlife photography and how Ethan was teaching him to document the desert so people will protect it instead of fear it. The twins, still occasionally shy, with strangers, had written a simple list titled Why We Want to Stay with Mr. Ethan that included endearingly specific items like he makes pancakes in animal shapes and he checks for monsters but doesn't pretend they're not real. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, Judge Ramirez announced at the conclusion, I am granting permanent legal guardianship to Ethan Blackwood and approving the name change to Hernandez Blackwood for all 4 children. This court finds that Mr. Blackwood has provided exemplary care and a stable, nurturing environment during the provisional period. The children have clearly bonded with their guardian and are thriving under his care. She removed her glasses, her formal judicial demeanor softening slightly. Off the record, Mr. Blackwood, what you've created here is remarkable. These children have overcome extraordinary trauma through your commitment and care. I will be noting in my formal opinion that this guardianship serves as an exceptional model for non-relative placement of sibling groups. Outside the courthouse, the celebration was spontaneous and joyful. Manuel and Josefina had come to support them, along with several of Ethan's former colleagues and the children's teachers. Someone had brought cupcakes, and even James unbent, enough from his usual professional reserve to accept one from Elena, who insisted on serving him first as thanks for talking to the judge so good. What happens next? Diego asked as they prepared to leave, chocolate frosting decorating his upper lip. We celebrate today's victory, Ethan answered, and tomorrow we keep working on the immigration case. But the guardianship is permanent now. We're officially family in the eyes of the law. We were already family, Sofia stated, with the matter-of-fact certainty of a 7-year-old. The judge just needed to catch up. This simple observation drew laughter from the adults and perfectly captured the truth they had all recognized. Legal proceedings might formalize their bonds, but the true family had formed in those first weeks of cautious trust-building, in shared meals and nightmares soothed, in small kindnesses and gradual healing. Spring arrived in the desert with spectacular blooming that transformed the seemingly barren landscape into a riot of color. The ironwood trees, central to Ethan and Rebecca's annual tradition, burst into purple flowers that attracted hummingbirds and created a visual symphony against the blue desert sky. True to Maria's suggestion months earlier, the entire family embarked on a photography expedition to document the ironwood bloom. Ethan had equipped each child with a camera appropriate to their age and skill level, from professional-grade equipment for Diego to simple but sturdy models for the twins. Maria had chosen a vintage film camera from Ethan's collection, preferring the deliberate process of carefully composing each limited shot. They hiked to the secret grove Manuel had shown Ethan and Rebecca years earlier, now accessible to the children after months of building their desert stamina and knowledge. The same trail that had once led Ethan to their desperate hiding place now served as a path to collective joy. "This is it," Ethan announced as they entered the grove, where ancient ironwood trees, some over 800 years old, created a natural cathedral of twisted trunks and delicate purple blossoms. Rebecca's favorite place in the whole desert. The children fell silent, absorbing the beauty with expressions of wonder. Even the normally energetic twins became still, their small faces turned upward to observe butterflies dancing among the flowers. "It's like they're decorated for a celebration," Diego observed, already framing shots with his camera, "like they knew we were coming." "Maybe they did," Ethan replied, finding no need to diminish magical thinking in this magical place. "Nature has its own wisdom," as Manuel always says. They spent hours in the grove, each finding their own way to connect with the environment. Diego methodically documented the relationship between the blooming trees and the insects they attracted. The twins collected fallen blossoms to press into the nature journals Josefina had helped them create. Maria sat beneath the largest tree, alternating between photography and sketching, occasionally closing her eyes as if absorbing the atmosphere through all her senses. Ethan moved among them, offering technical advice when requested, but mostly allowing them to develop their own relationship with this special place. He found himself thinking of Rebecca, of the first time they had visited this grove together, of her delight in discovering such improbable beauty in a landscape many dismissed as barren. "I wish you could see them," he thought toward her memory. "These incredible children. How they've grown, how they've helped me grow too." As if sensing his thoughts, Maria approached quietly, her vintage camera hanging around her neck. "Is it okay to be happy here?" she asked softly. "Since it was your special place with Rebecca?" The question revealed her continuing sensitivity to the complex emotions that defined their blended family, the awareness that joy in the present existed alongside honor for the past. "It's absolutely okay," Ethan assured her. "Rebecca would have loved seeing this place through new eyes. She always said beauty existed to be shared." Maria nodded, processing this permission to fully embrace the experience. "I think my parents would feel the same way, about us finding new happiness, I mean." "I believe they would," Ethan agreed. "They risked everything for your future. They would want that future to include joy, not just safety." This conversation, like many between them, balanced on the edge between childhood and premature wisdom. Maria navigated this boundary daily, sometimes needing to be simply a 12-year-old girl, other times drawing on the maturity forced upon her by circumstance. "Diego wants to know if we can camp here someday," she said, changing the subject toward more practical matters. "He's been reading about desert astronomy." "That's an excellent idea," Ethan replied, mentally noting Diego's continuing intellectual growth. "The stars out here, away from any light pollution, are incredible. We could invite Manuel to share some of the Tohono O'odham star stories." As evening approached, they gathered their equipment and prepared for the hike back. Before leaving, Ethan suggested a family photograph beneath the largest ironwood tree, not just for documentation, but as a marker of their first visit as a complete family unit. Setting up his tripod and timer, he arranged them beneath the ancient tree's canopy of purple blossoms. The setting sun filtered through the branches, creating a natural spotlight that seemed almost deliberately placed. "Everyone say ironwood," Ethan called as he rushed to join them before the timer expired. "Ironwood!" they chorused, their faces alight with the simple joy of the moment, but also strong. "We are both," Ethan affirmed, "happy and strong. That's what family can be at its best, a place where you find joy, but also develop strength." As he looked at their completed family album, Ethan marveled at the journey documented within its pages. From a grieving widower photographing desert landscapes in solitude to the father of 4 extraordinary children. From isolated trauma survivors to confident, healing young people with bright futures. From strangers connected by desperate circumstances to a family bound by choice, commitment, and love. The desert outside their windows had witnessed this transformation. The same landscape that had nearly claimed the children's lives had become the backdrop for their collective healing. Its harsh beauty and surprising resilience mirrored their own journey from devastating loss to unexpected connection. "The desert knows who belongs together," Maria had once said in her wisdom beyond years. Looking at their family portrait, these 5 people who had found each other against impossible odds, Ethan believed she might be right. The pink sock that had first caught his attention now held a place of honor in their memory box, alongside other artifacts of their extraordinary journey. The children's original identification papers, Rebecca's favorite ironwood photograph, the court documents marking each legal milestone. These tangible reminders of their path served as touchstones, connecting past to present while pointing toward a future they would continue to build together. As night fell over the desert, bringing the spectacular star display that still inspired, or even after years of witnessing it, the Hernandez Blackwood family gathered on their back deck. The same landscape that had once represented danger and death now symbolized home, safety, and possibility. The same stars that had watched over desperate children hiding beneath a rock now illuminated a family celebrating its hard-won unity. 3 years ago today, Ethan said quietly, I went looking for ironwood blossoms and found something far more precious. And we were waiting for help that seemed impossible, Maria added. But it came anyway. Diego, developing his father's gift for finding meaning in nature, pointed to a saguaro cactus silhouetted against the darkening sky. Manuel says the saguaro grows for 50 years before it produces arms. It looks alone for decades, but eventually becomes something that shelters others. Damn, the desert metaphor captured their transformation perfectly. Isolation transformed into connection. Individual survival becoming collective flourishing, painful waiting yielding eventually to unexpected growth. Elena, ever the musician, suggested singing the traditional song Josefina had taught them, a melody about desert birds finding water in unlikely places. Their voices blended in the cool evening air, Spanish and English verses alternating in the cultural bridge they had built together. As the stars multiplied overhead, Ethan reflected on the extraordinary gift the desert had given him, not just 4 children to love, but a second chance at creating family when he had believed that possibility ended with Rebecca's death. The children had received the safety and stability their parents had sacrificed everything to provide, and together they had transformed trauma into growth, loss into connection, ending into beginning. The desert, harsh teacher that it was, had shown them all that beauty emerges in the most unlikely circumstances, that life persists in the most challenging environments, and that sometimes the most precious blooms appear only after the most severe seasons of drought. Their family, forged in the crucible of the Sonoran Desert, bore the marks of that harsh beginning. But like the ironwood tree that grows stronger through adversity, those very challenges had created something remarkably resilient. The Hernandez Blackwood family stood as living testimony that sometimes from the most devastating losses come the most unexpected gifts, and that healing happens not by erasing painful history, but by writing new chapters that honor all that came before while creating something entirely new. As Sofia leaned against his side and Diego pointed out constellations, as Elena hummed softly and Maria sketched the night landscape in her ever-present journal, Ethan silently thanked the desert for its harshness and its gifts, for taking so much from all of them and then, against all odds, giving back even more. In the scorching Sonoran Desert of Arizona, summer of 2005, a tragedy unfolded that would have normally been recorded as just another heartbreaking statistic in the harsh realities of border crossings. The desperate journey of the Hernandez family ended in devastation when their water ran out 3 days into their trek, leaving 4 children alone in the merciless desert heat. At least that's what Border Patrol agents reported after finding scattered belongings and 2 adult bodies. But what they failed to discover were the 4 Hernandez children: Maria, 11, Diego, 9, twins Sofia and Elena, 6, who had wandered away from the scene, following their mother's final instruction to find shade and wait for help. Nikki 2 years after Ethan had discovered the children in the desert, a white envelope arrived bearing the official seal of the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. His hands trembled slightly as he placed it unopened on the kitchen table, waiting for the children to return from school. This moment belonged to all of them. The cabin that had once been his solitary refuge now hummed with life in the after-school hours. Diego burst through the door first, his backpack slung casually over one shoulder, already launching into a story about his science teacher's reaction to his wildlife photography project. The twins followed, their identical faces distinguished, now by personal style choices. Sofia's hair cut short for practicality, Elena's kept longer and often adorned with colorful clips. Maria entered last, her movements measured and deliberate as always, though the rigid vigilance of their early days had softened into a more natural teenage thoughtfulness. "Is that it?" she asked immediately, her keen eyes spotting the envelope before she'd even removed her backpack. At 13, Maria had developed into a perceptive young woman who often noticed what others missed. Ethan nodded. "It came today. I wanted us all to be together when we opened it." The mood in the kitchen shifted instantly. Diego fell silent mid-sentence, his normally expressive face suddenly still. The twins moved closer together, their hands automatically finding each other as they had in moments of stress since infancy. Maria straightened her shoulders, preparing herself for whatever news the envelope might contain. "Should we call James first?" she suggested practically, always thinking of contingency plans. "He said they would notify him electronically," Ethan replied. "He'll probably call soon, but this is our moment first, together whatever it says." Dune. They gathered around the table, this family forged from tragedy and held together by choice. The special immigrant juvenile status applications had crawled through the system for nearly 2 years, with James fighting bureaucratic delays and navigating the complex intersection of immigration and family law. This envelope represented the culmination of that journey, the final decision on whether the children could remain permanently in the United States, with the possibility of eventual citizenship. "Who should open it?" Ethan asked, honoring their agency in this pivotal moment. The children exchanged glances, their silent communication, a language Ethan had learned to recognize but not interrupt. Finally, Diego spoke. "Maria should open it," he said decisively. "She remembered the most from before. She kept us alive in the desert." The twins nodded in agreement, and Maria accepted the envelope with the gravity it deserved. Her slender fingers worked carefully at the seal, her expression composed despite the enormity of the moment. She unfolded the official letter, her eyes scanning the formal language, searching for the essential information amid the bureaucratic terminology. Ethan watched her face, holding his breath. After everything they had endured together, the trauma of their rescue, the separation during those initial legal proceedings, the gradual building of trust, the Guatemala trip that had reconnected them with their heritage, this paper would determine whether their family could truly put down permanent roots. Maria's composure broke suddenly, her eyes filling with tears as she looked up from the letter. "Approved," she whispered, her voice catching. "All four of us, permanent legal residents with a pathway to citizenship when we're older." Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us!